Hi guys, welcome back to our
Whatever
vlog.
this is.
I don't know. It is Tia and Reagan here.
Hi.
If you guys did not get a chance to watch our first video, go ahead and go and watch that one, just so we are all on the same page. And we are going to be talking about Daniel 3 today. So if you have not read that yet, go ahead and pause the video and read that, and then come back and we'll get started. But before we jump into the scripture, Tia and I were talking about how fun it would be to have some kind of tagline, or what else would you call it?
I don't know, like a catchphrase almost.
Yeah. Yeah. Since we have so many fans. So it's Friday and we're not creative enough to come up with one on our own. So we would like for you guys to give us some options. So you can comment them on this video, or you can text either one of us and let us know any ideas you've got. Anything else that I'm forgetting before we jump into things, Tia?
I don't think so. I'm excited to see what you guys want us to say every video. Please be kind.
Then we'll have to, if they give us a tagline, we'll have to sprinkle it in throughout the video too.
Oh, it's a new challenge.
Yeah.
I'm into it.
Yeah.
Well, shall we?
Yeah. Let's get started.
Woohoo. Starting with Nebuchadnezzar's golden image in Daniel chapter 3, verses 1 through 7.
Okay. Yours breaks it up differently than mine does.
Oh, what does yours say?
Mine just breaks it up into chapters. But we'll go by your second. So 1 through 7.
Yes.
Okay. Do you want me to start, or do you want to start?
Up to you.
You go ahead today.
Great. Just to put into perspective, we've talked a little bit about King Nebuchadnezzar. We see here that he makes an image of gold, 60 cubits tall and 6 cubits wide. In feet, we're 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. That's huge. I have no idea what to even compare that to, because that's huge. Right?
Yeah. I'm gonna look something up.
Okay. Huge. It's interesting because on the plain of Dura, that they talk about in verse 1, that this is where the statue is, there still remains a giant base that in itself is 20 feet tall and 46 feet wide, which is a huge base for a 90-foot tall statue already.
Okay, the double-decker buses famous in London, the red buses. So 3.2 of those in length.
I hate that.
Yeah.
That's too big.
So 2.5 times as tall as a telephone pole.
That one I think hits home more for me. I've got telephone poles right out here.
Yeah, just look out the window.
Crazy.
Very tall. Anyway.
Very tall. And if we remember Nebuchadnezzar's dream from chapter 2, this is not an exact replica, but he is building a statue made of, or at least overlaid in gold, which could be seen as a way to assert his dominance, and the fact that his kingdom will never end, even though Daniel's interpretation of the dream says otherwise. Yeah.
In verse 2, it says he basically, King Nebuchadnezzar summoned all of the like all the officials.
Mm-hmm.
And this wasn't just a some kind of like religious ceremony, but this was basically them taking a loyalty oath. Like he was asking them to not only to come, but he was asking them to pledge their allegiance
Yeah.
to him as well by obeying.
Yeah. It's something that Tom talked about a little bit. Tom Trask, our wonderful campus pastor with the Mizzou Chi Alpha, um, he did a message on this a little while back on Daniel 3 in the fiery furnace, which we'll get to in a second. And we will link his message, the audio to that, in the description below. It's a great message. If you want to go listen to it, it gives more depth on Daniel 3. So highly recommend. But something that he talked about too was that they are pledging allegiance to him and to this nation state. So as much as this is a spiritual thing, King Nebuchadnezzar is using spiritual things as a way to kind of gain political power with the satraps and the chief officials all over the kingdom. He's trying to align himself with a religion to make himself more attractive politically, which has been seen in lots and lots of rulers and lots of countries throughout lots and lots of history. So interesting.
Yeah.
The only other thing that I have about that is something that had never stood out to me before. But verse 7, therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, and then it says that they all immediately fell down. Like as they were hearing it, they all immediately obeyed. But something that had never stuck out to me before is the use of music here. Music is powerful, and I think we know that, especially in our time of corporate worship during services on Tuesday nights. Like those are some of my favorite times to just be with the Lord and be in community with people. Like that's so powerful. And the Lord loves music. Like he loves music, and he uses music for his own worship, for his own glory. But we see here that just because it's music doesn't make it good. And music can also be used for evil and for purposes that are not of God. So just kind of a reminder to be careful and cautious of what we're putting into our minds and our ears, because this music was not for God, it was not of God, and it was not meant to glorify him in any way.
One other thing from this section. So the furnace, the blazing furnace, is first mentioned, I think, in verse 6. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. And one note that I had was that, like in my Bible, was that this furnace was most likely created specifically for the purpose of making the image, the statue. And so I have some more things on that later and some more thoughts on that, but just to throw that in there, like this furnace was made specifically for that, they think.
Yeah. Okay. So if we move on to some more of those thoughts in the fiery furnace, it's kind of a bigger section. It kind of takes us through the entirety of chapter 3. So starting in verse 8, going through the end of chapter 3, talk about the fiery furnace. Did you want to add in more thoughts there, or do you want to do some other things in between?
Some other things in between.
Okay, perfect. I think it's very interesting. If you remember our discussion about the Chaldeans in chapter 2, that we have some certain Chaldeans who come back in chapter 3. Chapter 3, verse 8, therefore at that time certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. In chapter 2, if we remember, these Chaldeans, these magicians and enchanters, could not interpret or tell the king what his dream was, but Daniel could. Daniel and his friends who prayed for the interpretation and for a revelation of the dream were able to do that through God's provision, not the God. Through his provision, they were able to do that. So it makes sense, maybe, that certain Chaldeans would not like them very much. They would not like Daniel and his friends. They were able to do something that these Chaldeans could not do. They were able to win favor from the king and be promoted to high positions in his government that the Chaldeans were not able to do. Also, most of the Chaldeans were most likely killed or sought to be killed in the process of Daniel 2, as they could not fulfill the king's request. So if the king has come after you, wanting to kill you, someone else saves your life but also gets promoted instead of you, you might not like him very much.
Yeah. One thing that I have just with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which I think it's really interesting that we, as far as I know, from here on out, those are the names that they're referred to in Scripture, which is interesting because these are the names that were given to them by the king in their time of re-education. And so these were not their Hebrew names. And so I think that that's interesting.
And why we hear Daniel as a Hebrew name,
right.
But we hear his friends with Babylonian names.
Right. Yeah, it's just interesting. But I think one thing that's really cool, and I'm not sure, I'd have to look it up. I'm not sure how much time has passed between chapter 2 and chapter 3. But if we remember, these in chapter 2, these were still young guys. These were 17, 18, and we primarily associate these 3 guys with Daniel, and we think of them as like friends of Daniel. And so their faith and them alone, they don't really stand out much in our minds. But I think that it's really cool that we see here that even without Daniel by their sides, even after we talked about last time, those years of forced re-education, they are still serving the Lord on their own. And not just that, but doing it. We talked about how bold Daniel was in the last chapter, but just how bold they are. And I think that that's really cool, especially with, like, they weren't, the fact that other people could see them means that they weren't just doing this in their own homes or where they were. So they weren't being disrespectful about it. They weren't making a scene, but yet they also weren't hidden. And so I think that we need to give these 3 guys a little more credit than sometimes is our initial instinct.
And that's important too, because in that section, coming from verse 8, that the Chaldeans had to come forward and accuse the Jews. There were a lot of people. Like when you were saying in verse 2 that he sent together the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, counselors, all of these people. There are a lot of people here at kind of like a almost political rally to like worship the king. So no, they weren't hidden. They were there. But like you said too, this wasn't like a public protest. They weren't like violently, no, absolutely not. It was very peaceful. They just stood Everyone else fell and they just stood. But the king didn't notice. It wasn't something crazy that was meant to be disrespectful to, like, we don't like you, boss man. It was like, no, we just won't bow to
Yeah.
anyone who's not our God.
Yeah.
Um, but because they weren't hidden, they had to know that someone could see them.
Mm-hmm.
They had to know that someone would probably point them out to the king, um, and that he would be very mad. They've seen him mad before, and it's
Right.
not pretty when King Nebuchadnezzar is mad. But they still obeyed God instead of fearing what could happen to them from men.
Yeah. And again, we see just the level of reverence and respect that they had for authority, um, in the fact that they, just the way that they went about this,
Mm-hmm.
we can see the respect that they had for
Yeah.
authority.
Yeah. And they, like, if you're imagining this as a scene that you can kind of see, you have this huge statue with a king, teeny tiny little king standing right next to a huge statue. You have a crowd of people. You've got these three dudes who are standing and everyone else is flat on their face. In verse 13, says, then Nebuchadnezzar in furious rage commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. You have like guards coming out into the middle of a sea of people and grabbing these three men and bringing them up to like the stage or the like platform or whatever is there in front of everybody. This is not a private matter anymore. Like, this is a place where there is enormous pressure to compromise and to make excuses and to say, oh, you're right, like now everyone can see us, I'm so sorry, yeah, I'm just gonna tie my sandal right now. Like, they had every like earthly thing against them, but they continued to stand on the faithfulness of God, and remained faithful to God too. Just very impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. These guys just, this, us reading this and discussing it has made me, I've read Daniel before, and it's just making me just, have a new level of respect for these guys. Yeah, because how many times do we not even just sort of, deny the Lord, but, blatantly?
Mm-hmm.
And they were faced with all of that and they didn't.
Yeah.
And this is before we even get to the furnace.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Before we get to the furnace, but they already knew it was a threat.
right.
Like, they already knew kind of what the consequence was going to be. And they were still like, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
What you were saying about their respect for authority, even though this authority is unjust and not godly, the way that they respect King Nebuchadnezzar is incredible. And we see that really, really well in verses 16 through 18, in just the most beautiful response to the king. Again, they have been like brought in front of a sea of people, probably with guards still on each arm, like
Yeah.
holding them there in front of an angry king. And they say in verse 16, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. Your Majesty, I don't need to defend myself." That is not my first instinct,
No.
like, at all.
In and I had a note on that too. My note says, "Yikes." Um,
Sorry
yeah.
about my dog barking also.
Hi, Paisley.
She
We
heard
love
a
you.
car door outside and she's very upset. It's okay. It's okay.
She's a good girl. That's okay. Um, yeah. Yikes with that, because in any situation, our gut reaction is to defend ourselves,
Yeah.
even if it's justified.
Mhm.
Even if we think that we're in the right. Um, and these guys were following the Lord,
Yeah.
and by a lot of our own, a lot of us would say that, yeah, they should have been able to defend themselves. They had that right. They were being obedient to God, but yet they didn't.
Mhm.
Um, that one hurts me a little bit.
I know. And it's a note that I have from a couple years ago when I had read Daniel a couple years, and I mean, I've read it since then, but this was a note that I made a couple of years ago, um, that says there was no need to defend, only to proclaim. They didn't have to defend themselves, and they didn't have to defend God.
Yeah.
God is big and strong enough to defend himself. And that's scary because I want to fight for him. I love God and I want to fight for him.
Yeah.
But he doesn't need me to fight for him. They
No.
don't say, like, no, because I want to do this for God. And they just proclaim how good he is. Like,
Mm.
our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O King. Verse 18. But if not, be it known to you, O King, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Oof.
Verse 18 is, this one gets me every time.
I know.
It's one of my favorite just short lines, but even if he does not.
Mhm.
And I think that just translates into everything. That's something that the Lord was really kind of speaking to me at the end of last semester. Actually, I think that we can look at this in our own lives, with even with like sin that we fall back into or whatever. A lot of times walking through that is really messy and takes a long time, and we really do just want the Lord to take it from us.
Yeah.
Like whatever it is, whatever trial or struggle, we want the Lord, like, just take it from me right now. um, but even if he doesn't,
Mhm.
um, I want to be able to say that Lord, like, even if you don't take this from me,
Yeah.
you are still God, and I'm still going to serve you in the same way.
Yeah.
um
And I think it's important too to note that this isn't them like negating everything they just said God was going to do. Like, they're
mhm,
not giving God a cop out
right.
at all. Like, they know that God is
17,
powerful.
you say our God is able to deliver
Yeah,
us.
absolutely. Like,
Yeah.
they know he's powerful enough and they're going to proclaim that he's powerful enough, but they also know their place
Yeah.
in relationship to God, and they know that they don't know his will all the time. And they
Yeah.
know that his plans are better. And they
Yeah.
know that even if they die, he's still able to save them. And it echoes Job 13:15, where it says, though he slay me, I will hope in him. Just that surrender and that total submission to God and his will before our own and before our own desires. Beautiful. And I too would like to be better at that.
Yeah.
We are to the fiery furnace itself now.
Yeah. It is. My Bible said that it was 1,650 degrees Fahrenheit.
Normally, or was this when it was heated 7 times more than usual?
Okay, so my Bible actually I have a cultural study Bible.
Beautiful.
And it says that was a hyperbole. It says that the brick kilns of that time normally operated around 1600 degrees. With the technology available, it wouldn't have been possible to even double this temperature.
Okay.
So the king was just really, really mad.
Yeah.
Make it hotter.
But even then, verse 22, and you tell me again if this is hyperbole, but because the king's order was urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It was so hot that the people who threw them in died.
Yeah. Well, and something that I had never noticed before, it doesn't even seem like a big deal, but verse 21 says, so these men wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. So theoretically, with all of these clothing on, they should have just gone up in flames immediately. So I think that it's cool, actually, that they mentioned that, just so that you have a clearer picture, and also just like they should have gone up in flames. Yeah.
I found something kind of beautiful that is a theory. This is not in the Bible, but this is just kind of a theory about what may have happened. Obviously, the three men were tossed, bound into the fiery furnace. The guys who threw them in died immediately. These guys are wearing all of their clothes, so they should go up in flames like that. It could be assumed that because of this, Nebuchadnezzar didn't even plan on looking twice. He said, okay, kill them. He knew everyone was going to die who was in that scenario, and he probably turned around and walked away, knowing that, like, there's no chance that these three boys are going to survive this. I don't even need to look. Again, this is not in the Bible. So do not take my word as gospel right now. I want to be very clear about that. But some people speculate that there would have been no reason for him to turn around and even see that there were four men, which we'll get there in a second, to even see the three guys in the fire, until he heard them singing praises to God. The Bible says nothing about them singing praises to God, but with their character, and with the assumption that they were supposed to die immediately, why would he look?
Right. And he immediately looked.
Yeah.
Because in verse 23, and these three men firmly tied fell into the blazing furnace. Verse 24 says, then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what would cause him to do that?
And how beautiful would it be if these three guys,
right?
Huh?
I hope that's right.
Me too. That they're just standing in the fire singing to God. I hope that's what happened too. And even if not, it's a beautiful representation of their character. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to come back to the furnace.
Yes.
So there's a lot that we can talk about in like verse 25, just in general.
Yeah.
Because this is where Nebuchadnezzar says, he said, look, I see four men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the fourth looks like a son of the gods. And so here they are. They had been tied up and thrown into this furnace that was made specifically for the purpose of making this huge golden statue, this idol. And yet here they are in this place, not only meant to kill them, but meant solely for the purpose of worshiping other gods. And yet here they are not just laying there, but walking around unbound and free, even in that place.
Yeah.
It's not after they get out that they're unbound, but in that place,
Yeah.
because of the presence of the Lord.
Yeah.
And I just think that that's so beautiful. And I think that I like the fact even more that that furnace was made for
Yeah.
making that idol.
Something interesting too is that, like you said in verse 25, the appearance of the fourth is like a son of the gods, that they say there is a fourth person in there. But when Nebuchadnezzar calls them out of the fire, still only the three come out. Only Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego come out. And something interesting that I read that I wouldn't have even thought of before is that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego might not have known there was a fourth person with them. Like it doesn't ever say that they saw him there. It doesn't, like Nebuchadnezzar saw, but we have no idea if the three guys even saw him there. But that doesn't mean he wasn't there, that his presence was still enough, even if they didn't know.
And how beautiful and perfect of a picture is that for us?
Yeah.
I hope they didn't see him.
Yeah.
Because for one, they weren't doubting that God was with them. Even if they didn't see like the presence of the Lord walking around, they never doubted for a second that he was there. But yet other people physically saw it.
Yeah.
And so if people are able to look at us as we are literally in the fire,
Yeah,
and to see the presence of God,
that gave me chills a little bit. It's so beautiful though.
Yeah.
In the midst of the fire, in the midst of the trial, I know God is with me, but I can't see him. I don't know where I'm going, and I don't know why I'm still here. But if you can see him working in my life, and you can fit, like, that's so beautiful. Such a great image to apply to.
God is so cool.
I know.
It's so cool.
Oh. I think too, even just along those lines, um, like they said before, when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were not sticking up, but like telling the king, our God is able to save us. He is able to deliver us from the fiery furnace. That God can deliver us from a trial, but he can also miraculously sustain and strengthen us in the trial. Yeah. He's still God, even if you're in the trial. Yeah.
That reminds me of, I had the opportunity last summer to preach on Psalm 66, and it's talking about like basically the Israelites going through the flood and the fire and thanking the Lord for them, not just thanking the Lord for getting them through it, but thanking them for the fire. And I think that these guys would have agreed with that.
Yeah, absolutely. What else do you have? I think one last note, kind of touching on what you had said in chapter 2, just a little callback. In chapter 2, verse 47, the king answered and said to Daniel, "Truly your God is God of gods and Lord of kings and revealer of mysteries, So some people will look at that and be like, oh, he loves God now. Success. But we see him fall down and worship Daniel instead. And like you said, yes, God is absolutely moving and stirring things in his heart, but he doesn't believe in God yet. And I think it's interesting here at the end of chapter 3 to see Nebuchadnezzar say in verse 28, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to keep going and to say, for there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. Like, he knows, King Nebuchadnezzar knows a lot about God at this point. He knows a lot about his power and his mercy for his children. He knows that he's God of the Jews. He knows the way that he saves. He knows a lot about God. He has seen God work miracles over and over again through these 4 men's lives, these 4 boys. But that doesn't mean he knows God yet. We definitely see that start to change in chapter 4, which we'll talk about next time. But I think that's important to note, that we can know a lot about God. We can do a lot for God. And that doesn't mean we know him or we're doing things because we want to be close to him.
Yeah.
And I know that's hard for me because I like to do things for God, and that's not a bad thing. God asks us to serve him and to serve his children. But sometimes doing things for God can get in the way of our relationship with him. And I think knowing about God is getting in the way a lot of Nebuchadnezzar knowing God. It doesn't mean we should stop trying to learn about God. We want to learn about God, and we want to know him personally and relationally for ourselves. But we have to watch how those things kind of balance out.
Yeah. And I'm excited to talk some more about King Nebuchadnezzar with chapter 4.
Yes. Very excited to talk about chapter 4. And like I said, we will do that next time. So if you want to read that in advance and then just do a refresher before we get into the video, please do. But I think that's all we have for Daniel chapter 3.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Thanks for watching, guys. We will see you next time. Again, if you guys have any questions or thoughts or ways we can do this better, please let us know.
Yes. And don't forget, this one's a sillier challenge than last time. I hope you guys did pray the prayer in chapter 2. I did, and it's crazy and weird and beautiful. And we're going to keep practicing praying scripture like that. This challenge is a little sillier, but please, if you have any suggestions for a silly tagline or catchphrase, or even something that we should call these are Chi Alpha video devotionals, but I don't know, give us something silly and fun, and we'll work on it for you.
We love all of you guys.
Yes.
And we'll see you next time.
Yes. Bye.